So my name is Michaela Toll, and I did my presentation on polygamy, sex, and how that um, is kind of involved and associated with cultural factors into the community. So when we look at how polygamy is affected by media, we see a lot of things like the show Sister Wives, where the four wives and their families all live together, and it shows a reality show view of how they live their lives and what they believe in and what a day-to-day is like. That's kind of one of the only well-known representations we have of really what goes on inside a polygamy family. So there's also what we've seen in the media and what we've heard about the situation and conviction of Warren Jeffs with the reported sex offense against his children and other members inside their society. That's another negative view that we have from the media on polygamy. So because of these negative portrayals, it's hard for us to really know from the media what actually goes on inside these communities, where we only have a limited view inside via the media this way. As far as family support goes, a lot of what I looked into, a lot of the articles I read kind of talked about how there is a form of special family support inside these groups. If you think about multiple women bearing children with the same husband and having a family group that way, they have a large support system because there's more of them within the larger communities, like the communities that live in Utah, Arizona, Colorado, Montana. You have a large community living together, living among the same morals and beliefs. And when you have that, you kind of look at it maybe as they have a wider range of a support group. So the family support is definitely there. There can also be negative angles to that too. So as far as family support goes on a financial level, I looked a lot into it, and what really came to my mind at first is if you have multiple wives, numerous children, and one father figure, where they're living in the idea that the father is the supporter, the patriarch of the family, you kind of have to think that that's more mouths to feed, that's more bodies to clothe. So it kind of makes you wonder what their financial level is like, and the stress that that's putting on the family and the consequences of that as far as what the children are facing with education and healthcare, and what the wives are facing as far as mental health and physical health. So it seems like because of that, they would maybe be limited on that family support and be able to afford those things or be able to locate those things because of the environment that they're living in. So another thing that I kind of thought of and looked into is that religious views as far as family support. So there is large families that are all involved in the actions of polygamy, but then there's also those that go like in Sister Wives, where they come from a family that they weren't raised that way, and then they go into living that lifestyle, which is very different than what we're all used to, very different from the technical norm. So that can be kind of hard, maintaining that family support for people. Role of peers. So role of peers is kind of the same as the slide on family, where they're living in these large communities that are considered to be their family, and a lot of them, they do have a biological relation, but they're also considered peers where they're living in these communities. So the role of peers can be both positive and negative. When I was looking through some of the cases with the Warren Jeffs situation, there was a lot of negative reports from those who had left the religion, those who had left the group, talking about class and talking about those who followed, those who didn't, and how much reputation played a role in their lives and how successful they were, and the opportunities that they got, and how it could really affect them in their own personal life and their day-to-day struggles if they didn't fit into a certain norm within the community itself, and they could be outcast within the community, which then they're an outcast in the community and also an outcast in the actual outspread community that they're living in outside of their private norms. So that can be a hard one for people. Shared goals, looking at what the goals are for a community like that, what they're looking towards, working towards, how they're raising their families, their religious views and ideas, and those kind of things. So with cyclical nature, kind of what the normal day-to-day routines are for people, is kind of the same as the last slide with families and marriages, what they consider normal, what ages they consider normal, what are their beliefs as far as when a woman is ready to be married, the traditions that they perform with marriage, the traditions they perform with childbirth, and just their family units and how they live their day-to-day lives like that. It can kind of be hard for us bystanders in the community because we don't actually understand what's going on inside their families and inside their communities. And all we see is the media portrayal, and those are the only ideas we have to go off of, whereas for us it seems very unnatural because we're used to the man-woman marriage. So this is something that's very different to us and can definitely bring on a lot of negative stigma. So one of the biggest issues that comes up with polygamy is the legal aspect of it, because in all 50 states of America, it is illegal to practice polygamy. So that brings up the issue with these families, these husbands and wives, where only one wife would technically be able to be a legal marriage, and the others would just be considered married within the community's laws and regulations. If they have a organized standard set of that. Otherwise, they would just be living amongst each other, considering each other married, which is what happens in a lot of these communities. With the polygamy, those who are involved in it and those that get involved with some of the issues of it, like what we've seen on Warren Jeffs in the news with underage women being married into these groups, their mates, their future husbands being chosen by their parents. A lot of rumors, because it's hard to know where inside these communities they're very private about their religious views and their marital views and those kind of things. But from what we see, especially with the Warren Jeffs case, there was some definite proof of abuse and neglect and rape and other things along those lines, which again adds to the negative stigma, and it's something that we need to remember and kind of keep our eyes open for. But it's also something that we need to remember that is not our belief. It's something we still need to be open to, accepting to, and especially in our field of nursing, that we need to not have a lot of judgment as long as we're keeping our patients safe. So although polygamy is illegal in all 50 states, it still is somewhat prominent in the USA, more prominent in countries like Africa and India, where it's practiced a lot more commonly. So where these marriages are not considered illegal in America, there's a lot of interaction that we have to think of within like the school system and the government system and a financial way in the public health system, and how that affects these people's lives if they're not considered married. Even if you think of like a same-sex couple in America living together and it's illegal for them to be married, if one were to happen to the other, they don't have the same rights as a married couple would have, and that would go the same to this population. They miss out on a lot of those things because they're not allowed to have those multiple marriages. So there is a lot of barriers culturally inside this population. One of the ones that I've kind of touched on, that's one of the biggest things, is stigma. Even doing a lot of the research and reading a lot of the reviews of the people that live within these communities and those who really enjoy it and are passionate about it, and it's their life and their norm and what they believe in, we still have a stigma that there may be those inappropriate things going on as far as sexual abuse, as far as jealousy, and what these women are condoning to and what they're okay with, and if it's them being just as much involved or as if they just kind of got caught up within this population. So one of the biggest things that we need to think about as nurses is healthcare barriers. In particular, there's a polygamous population living near Hamilton, Montana, that live up in a mountain town that they've created for themselves, and they live up there with their polygamy families with multiple wives and their many children, and they've kind of isolated themselves up there. and with the financial aspect of it and the stigma aspect of it, we have to understand that the children and the women and the males in those families may not be getting the health care they need. They may not be getting the dental care that they need. They may not be getting the food and nutrition they need. They may not be getting the social integration that they need to really fully develop. And we also have to think about their involvement in the school system and what kind of education they're getting, because that can be really important in the health and physical, mental, emotional of a child growing up. So that's something that we need to be conscious of as nurses when we're taking care of these patients. It also, you have to look into the fact of if it's technically a single mother with these children where their marriages aren't recognized, they may be qualified or able to receive certain government programs like WIC, BRAG, other assistance that may help these individuals raise and support their families that we need to be aware of and be able to refer to these families without having the stigma of it being inappropriate or have them not qualifying. Because technically where they are unmarried single mothers, they do qualify for these programs that still may be helpful to their families. International scope. I kind of talked about how polygamy is still very prominent in Africa and India, and that's there and it's still happening, and it's not as much prominent in the research I did and the focus that I had on my assignment, so we'll kind of move on past that. But I found it very interesting that one of the most well-known people or group population of polygamists in America, when people were asked about it, was Utah. When the LDS Mormons came to Utah in the 1800s and settled down here and started families, that's kind of where polygamy's, the heart of polygamy, started and branched out, and kind of from lines of heritage and lineage from that is where it's still thriving from today. It's very interesting right here in Utah. I already kind of talked about the socio-economical status as far as government assistance and support for these people. We have to think about things like Medicare, Medicaid, insurance, and how that's going to affect these people where they're within their own private governing, they're considered husbands and wives and biological families, but within America's standards, they're technically not. And so we have to view them with a respect to their beliefs, but also in a inclusion of what we provide as far as government assistance, because they're still qualifying for that, and there can still be a high need within their families for that government assistance and for that health care, especially with the larger family size where it's possibly one-income families. If they don't support a belief of the women working outside the home, that's many more children being fed off of one income, being taken care of off of that one income and supported that way. So as far as religion goes, one of the most prominent religions, especially in this area associated with polygamy, is the Fundamental Latter-day Saints, which is the group that Warren Jeffs was the kind of the prophet or president over before he was arrested and sentenced to jail. So that's kind of an interesting factor. They have their own private beliefs and worship and what they believe in, kind of the same as we do, and that's something that as nurses we need to remember to respect and not be judgmental or prejudiced of. Gender, as far as within these populations, has a huge prominence because of the male being the center of the home, the male being the family unit. Within these populations, women aren't necessarily restricted, but it is common for them to not be able to have a job outside the home, not be able to make decisions for the family because the male is the center of the home, the male makes the decisions. But that's also in my research something I found that's evolving and changing for these families, and they're more adjusting to America's standards of that, and women are getting more rights, and women are getting more abilities and more responsibilities.